The chamber smelled like ozone and fear, though only one of those things was coming from the humans. Ambassador Seth Callow walked through the double-sealed blast doors of the Grand Conclave Hall on Drelvin Prime without looking up. He carried nothing. No datapad, no weapon, no ceremonial sash bearing the seals of Earth's 17 coalition governments. Just a man in a dark suit, salt and pepper hair cropped close, moving at a pace that suggested he had somewhere more important to be afterward. Behind him, his aide Jade Osei matched his stride, her expression unreadable, a single encrypted drive clipped to her lapel where a badge might go. The Vasali honor guard lining the entrance corridor, 7 feet tall, carapaced in bioluminescent blue-black, carrying plasma lances that could vaporize a ground vehicle, watched the two humans pass and said nothing. Their compound eyes tracked, their antennae angled forward. The instinct was ancient and universal. Something small is moving through our territory. We do not yet understand why it is not afraid. At the far end of the corridor, separated from the humans by 200 meters of polished obsidian flooring and a seating gallery filled with representatives from 43 spacefaring civilizations, the War Council of the Drelvin hegemony waited. They had been waiting for 11 days. The ceasefire was expiring in 6 hours. 3 hegemony fleets, the Kayla Formation, Thyrell's Hammer Group, and the newly commissioned Dreadnought Wing operating under Voss designation, sat at the edge of the Noxan system, with orders that would activate automatically when the clock ran out. Earth's entire diplomatic delegation consisted of 2 people. No warships in orbit, no military escort, no emergency quantum burst channel open to any allied fleet, because humanity had no allied fleet. The Interstellar Coalition had voted, 16-1, to let the hegemony have whatever they wanted in the Noxan corridor. The one dissenting vote had been Earth's, cast with the particular quiet confidence of someone who had already run the numbers. What those numbers were? That was the question no one in the chamber could answer yet. Seth Callow reached the center of the floor, stopped, and looked up for the first time. He found the eyes of Grand War Master Silrix of the Vasali and held them without flinching for a long moment. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down like a man settling in for a conversation he had already won. 3 months earlier, the word human had been a footnote in hegemony intelligence briefings. A species, carbon-based, with a single inhabited world, technically Class II civilization, pre-warp by Vasali measurement standards, possessing nuclear fission ships that moved at roughly 4% of light speed, capable of some basic orbital industry, chemically aggressive in their social bonding, short-lived, soft-bodied, nutritionally dependent on an absurd range of organic compounds. The preliminary threat assessment, authored by intelligence analyst Zahari of the 4th Bureau, had assigned humanity a conflict value of 0.3 on the Drelvin scale, roughly equivalent to an undefended mining colony on a contested asteroid. The Noxan corridor had changed nothing, in theory. Humanity's slow ship colony missions had been planting seed populations through that region of space for 60 years, a long, grinding march of generation ships and cryo-arcs that the hegemony's faster civilizations had simply never bothered to monitor. When the Kayla Formation swept through to secure the mineral rights to 6 systems in the corridor, they found 3 human colonies already established. Not military outposts, civilian settlements ranging from a few thousand to just over 100,000 people, with no defenses worth the description. The hegemony's extraction protocols were standard and swift. Zahari had been present when the first contact reports came in from the Noxan incident. She read them twice, then a third time, in the particular way she read things she wanted to be wrong about. The extraction teams had met no organized resistance. That was correct. The colonial militias had stood down almost immediately, which confirmed the 0.3 conflict value. But the transmission logs attached to the incident report, the ones that Zahari almost didn't open, told a different story. Because within 48 hours of the Kayla Formation's arrival, every human colony in the corridor had gone onto a communications blackout so complete that hegemony signals intelligence couldn't determine how it was being maintained. And within 72 hours, someone, unidentified, no hull registry matching any known human vessel, had placed a single hyperspace burst transmission directly into the Grand War Master's personal channel. The message was 7 seconds long. The translation was brief. "We are sending someone to talk. Please do not confuse that for weakness." Zahari had underlined that last sentence. The phrasing bothered her in ways she couldn't initially articulate, the way a noise in an empty room bothers you, not because it is loud, but because it should not be there at all. It read like someone who had been in this exact situation before. Nobody sends an unarmed ambassador to a war council. That was the thought circling through Zahari's mind as she watched Seth Callow take his seat in the center of the Grand Conclave Hall. She had been assigned as observer, which was a polite word for intelligence asset tasked with behavioral analysis. She sat in the gallery's third tier with a sensory recorder active behind her left eye and a direct line to the Bureau's pattern recognition architecture. She had profiled 19 species in active diplomatic status. She had watched representatives of the Xandarian collective faint under hegemony gravity projectors designed to remind them of their planet's low-mass origins. She had watched the Deloni hive speaker physically molt its outer carapace from stress during the Oseth Accords. She had never once seen any diplomat enter this room like they owned it. Callow hadn't spoken yet. He was simply sitting. His aide, Jade, had taken up a standing position precisely 2 meters to his left, a detail Zahari logged without immediately understanding why its precise nature troubled her. The Grand War Master had already recited the formal charges of territorial trespass. 3 hegemony subcommanders flanked Silrix at the curved dais. Kavith on his right, who ran logistics for the Noxon operation, and 2 others whose names were above Zahari's clearance level. Silrix spoke first. "You represent Earth's interests in this negotiation, Ambassador?" "I do," Callow said. His Vasali was precise, accent slight, no translator device visible. "Then you understand the terms." Silrix spread his primary manipulators in the formal gesture of presentation. "The Noxon corridor falls within hegemony expansion rights under the Drelvan Charter. Your colonies are unlicensed. Your populations may relocate to designated refugee processing zones. Non-compliance will trigger extraction by force." A pause. "We have given Earth 11 days. Callow nodded slowly. "I appreciate the clarity." Silence stretched. Kavith leaned towards Silrix. The whisper was meant to be private, but Zahari's recorder caught it. He brought nothing. No terms document. No counteroffer data package. He literally brought nothing. Callow heard it too. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. The barest settling, like a man who has just been told exactly what he expected to hear. He said, "Jade." His aide opened her hand, and the single encrypted drive on her lapel detached and floated to the center table on a small anti-grav cradle that she had apparently been carrying in her jacket pocket. The cradle was so precisely calibrated to Drelvan gravity that it settled at exactly table height without wobbling. "That's our counteroffer," Callow said. "Take as long as you need." Zahari pulled the data package 6 minutes before Silrix's technical team finished decrypting it, because the Bureau's architecture was considerably faster than the hegemony's official channels, and because Zahari had stopped trusting official channels in this particular situation 3 weeks ago. What she read made her antenna go flat. The document was not a counteroffer. It was not a treaty framework or a list of demands or an appeal to the Interstellar Coalition's arbitration process. It was a briefing, addressed to the War Council, with a cover notation that read, simply, "You should know what you are starting." It began with biology. Human beings, the document stated, had evolved on a world classified by Drelvan xenobiology as Category 9 hostile, placing it in the 98th percentile of biologically dangerous environments among surveyed planets. Earth's surface hosted over 300,000 species capable of lethality to an unprotected human. Of those, roughly 12,000 posed genuine systemic threat. Humans had not merely survived this. They had domesticated apex predators for companionship, introduced artificial selection into the evolutionary chains of thousands of competing species, and metabolically adapted to tolerate a range of toxins, temperature extremes, and radiation levels that would require life support equipment for any of the 43 civilizations currently seated in this gallery. Zahari knew that much, academically. What she did not know, what no hegemony intelligence file she had ever accessed had noted, was the next section. Warfare duration statistics. Continuous documented armed conflict on Earth's single-continent groupings, 12,000 years. Number of distinct military doctrines developed, tested, and actively archived, over 4,000. Number of weapons systems invented, refined, and then voluntarily decommissioned because they were considered too indiscriminate for use in war, 847. The Vasali had been a spacefaring species for 600 years. The Vasali had developed 12 military doctrines in that time. 12. Earth's military had more active combat psychology programs than the hegemony had total military research divisions. Humanity had fought wars lasting longer than the entire recorded history of some civilizations in this room, and they had stopped. Every single time, they had stopped. Rebuilt, made new rules, fought again under different rules, stopped again. Zahari's recorder was running, but she was no longer thinking about the behavioral analysis report she was supposed to be composing. She was thinking about the phrase in the initial transmission. Please do not confuse that for weakness. The Grand War Master had gone very still. Silrix had the controlled stillness of a predator. Zahari had seen it before, and she respected it. But this was different. This was the stillness of an apex predator that had just looked into a river and seen something larger looking back up. Callow had not moved. He sat with his hands folded loosely in his lap, watching Silrix read, watching Kavith read, watching the third-tier gallery where Zahari herself sat, suddenly aware that he had known she was there the entire time. He wasn't watching to intimidate. He was watching to calibrate. The document continued. Zahari forced herself to read it systematically. Current human military assets. The page stated a fleet number that was wrong, obviously wrong. The hegemony had surveyed human orbital capacity, and the numbers didn't match. Zahari flagged that page, then paused, then read the footnote. The footnote said, "The above numbers reflect only assets built under registered coalition governance and visible to external survey. They do not include assets constructed under the Black Tier Initiative, which has been operating since the hegemony's first survey of the Noxon corridor was detected by Earth's long-range monitoring network. The Black Tier assets have had 60 days of construction time. The hegemony is welcome to verify. We suggest doing so carefully." Zahari's processing architecture ran the calculation automatically. 60 days. Human industrial output, per the document's own figures, was rated at approximately 0.7 on the Drelvin Production Index. But humans worked in continuous shifts, 3 crews, 8-hour rotations, no rest cycle downtime, a detail that the production index formula had apparently never accounted for. Adjusted output, 2.1 on the same scale. At 2.1, over 60 days, with the material reserves implied by the colony infrastructure reports from Noxon, she stopped. She ran it again. The number didn't change. "You built warships," Silrix said. His voice was admirably controlled. Only the secondary tonal vibration in his thorax gave away anything, and only because Zahari was trained specifically to hear it. "We built some things, yes," Callow agreed. "In 60 days. We're fast when we need to be." Kavith spoke without permission, which was rare enough that Zahari immediately logged the timestamp. "That is not strategically possible. Your industrial base built the Transcontinental Railroad in under 4 years," Callow said pleasantly. "The atomic bomb in 3. A full orbital defense grid in 18 months when the Osith pirates started running their survey drones through our outer system back in 74. We're on the record with the coalition on all of that." A pause. "We tend to focus when someone gives us a deadline." The ceasefire had 6 hours remaining. There it was. The callback sitting in the back of Zahari's mind suddenly crystallized. The ceasefire clock had always been a threat directed at humanity. End it, and the hegemony fleets activate. But Callow had used 11 of those days not traveling, not negotiating with allies, not filing coalition briefs. He had used those 11 days to make sure that when the clock ran out, the hegemony would understand what starting that countdown had cost them. He had let them run the clock because the clock was working for him. The document's final section was titled, with characteristic human understatement, "On the Question of Resolve." Zahari read it standing up. She had not noticed herself standing. It contained no fleet coordinates, no weapon specifications, no tactical deployment data. It contained a single page of historical summary, a list of conflicts, each annotated with outcome and duration. Not wars humanity had started. Wars humanity had been losing. Wars in which the opposition had held every measurable advantage in technology, numbers, and position. Kill ratios. The document presented them without context, and the lack of context made them more disturbing. 3-1, 7-1, 14-1, 22-1. These were the exchange rates humanity had sustained and still prevailed. The annotation beneath read, "The above figures represent engagements where human forces were formally expected to fail. Our historical analysis suggests the primary mechanism of outcome inversion was not superior technology, but willingness to absorb losses past the point at which all modeled adversaries had historically capitulated. We offer this information not as a threat, but as relevant context for decision-making." One line after that, not in the formal summary, apparently added at the last minute in slightly different formatting, "We have never started a war. We have never lost one that reached our soil." Silrix read that line 3 times. Zahari watched his mandibles move. Callow said from the center of the floor, in the conversational tone of a man closing a business meeting, "The Noxon colonies stay. The extraction protocols stop. The hegemony will not be harmed, and we are not asking for anything from you except to be left alone." He unfolded his hands and placed both palms flat on the table, which was the Vasali gesture for finality. He had done his research. 6 hours is enough time to issue the recall order to your fleets, if you'd like to do that while the ceasefire is still technically in effect. And if we don't? Cavith asked. Callow looked at him for a moment, then looked at Silrix. He didn't answer Cavith. He didn't need to. The recall order went out with 4 hours and 17 minutes remaining on the clock. Zahari watched it process through the command channels from her position in the gallery. No announcement, no formal acknowledgement. Silrix simply made a gesture to the communications officer at the edge of the dais, and the order propagated outward through the fleet command structure in the terse, clipped language of military necessity, being quietly reclassified as strategic withdrawal. Callow stood, buttoned his jacket, and said something to Jade in English that Zahari's recorder captured, but her translation matrix marked as colloquial. She ran it through a secondary program later. He had said, "Same time next year, maybe." His tone was completely dry. Jade had replied, "God, I hope not." They walked out the same way they had walked in, same pace. Callow still hadn't looked at the honor guard. The vast obsidian floor that had felt, to Zahari, like a killing ground when they entered, now looked different somehow. Not smaller, but less significant. The way a courtroom loses its authority once you understand who actually holds the power in it. The doors sealed behind them. The chamber was silent for a long time. Zahari was aware, distantly, that she needed to file a report, that the Bureau expected a behavioral analysis of the human ambassador, threat indicators, negotiating tells, exploitable psychological profiles for future engagements. She had 47 minutes of high-resolution sensory data and a recording of every word spoken in this room. She pulled up the report template and stared at it. She thought about the production calculations. She thought about the kill ratios. She thought about a species that had spent 12,000 years practicing war on a planet that was actively trying to kill it, and had come out of that process not broken or brutal, but what? What was the word? She searched her vocabulary and found it in a Vasali philosophical text she had studied years ago, a term used to describe old soldiers who had seen too much and survived anyway. Tempered. That was the word. Not hardened. Tempered, as in the metallurgical process, the one that made materials simultaneously harder and more flexible, less brittle under pressure, more likely to bend before they broke, and more dangerous still when they finally didn't bend at all. Earth's history was a 12,000-year tempering process, and the man who had just walked out of this room was the finished product of it. She thought about the line Callow hadn't spoken to Cavith, the non-answer that had filled the room anyway. She thought about the footnote regarding the Black Tier assets. She thought about the fact that even now, those assets existed somewhere, built, crewed, armed, waiting, and that the hegemony had no confirmed location for a single one of them. That the recall order had been issued not because Silrix believed Earth's colonies weren't worth the Noxan minerals, but because for the first time in Zahari's career observing the hegemony's expansion decisions, the cost-benefit calculus had come up genuinely uncertain. Not unfavorable, uncertain. And the hegemony had survived 6 centuries of expansion by never engaging uncertain outcomes. There was one more thing. It had been bothering her since the moment Callow sat down and placed his hands on the table in that Vasali gesture of finality, and she had only just identified why. He hadn't learned that gesture from a translator protocol or a diplomatic briefing packet. The specific angle of the palms, the exact degree of finger spread, the slight forward lean, it was textbook. It was the gesture as performed by someone who had watched Vasali elders use it in person, multiple times, under authentic conditions. Not in a video archive. Not in a simulation. Someone had prepared Seth Callow for this meeting by having him physically present in Vasali company long before the Noxan incident ever became a crisis, which meant Earth had been watching the hegemony expand toward the Noxan corridor years before any hegemony intelligence file acknowledged humanity as a relevant party, which meant the 0.3 conflict value had not been a miscalculation. It had been a gift, allowed to persist because it served someone's purpose to be underestimated. Zahari closed the report template without writing a single word. She needed more time. Not to analyze Callow, she thought, with something close to humility, that she might never fully analyze him, that he was the representative of a civilization she had been looking at without ever correctly seeing, the way you could stare at a section of deep space for years and never notice the dark mass at its center until the moment it began to move. She needed more time to understand what had actually happened in this room today, what had been demonstrated, not merely won, because this had not been a negotiation, it had been a calibration. Callow had not come to Drelvan Prime to win a concession. He had come to establish, with surgical precision, exactly what humanity was. Not threateningly, not aggressively, not in the way that invited preemptive action from frightened powers, but with the absolute, unshakable confidence of something that has long since stopped needing to prove itself and simply chooses, in this particular moment, to let you see it clearly. He had walked in unarmed because the weapons were irrelevant. He had sat in the center of the floor because the center was the only appropriate place for what he was. He had not answered Kavith because the answer existed in every page of that document and in every year of the 12,000 years that preceded this moment. And if Kavith hadn't understood it by now, more words would not have helped. Zahari would file her report eventually. She would find the language, find the framework, find some way to translate what she had witnessed into the analytical vocabulary her bureau required. But she knew already that the report would be incomplete, because the complete version would require her to say something she had no precedent for, that the hegemony had encountered a civilization it needed to study, not for weakness, but for understanding, and that if it failed to make that distinction, the next meeting with a human ambassador, quiet, unhurried, arriving with nothing and carrying everything, might not end with a recall order and 4 hours to spare. Outside the sealed doors of the Grand Conclave Hall, across 200 meters of polished obsidian, through the blast doors in the corridor of unsettled honor guard, and out into the silver-white light of Drelvin Prime's afternoon, Seth Callow and his aide walked toward their transport without looking back. They never did.